The Wyoming sun shows no mercy, especially to those running from their own personal hell. For Amelia Vance, every searing ray was a reminder of the fire she'd left behind, the burning rage in her husband's eyes. Sterling Thorne wasn't just a man. He was an empire of dust and cattle, and she was his most prized and most broken possession. With her lungs full of fire and her hope dwindling to a single faint ember, she ran. She ran until her legs gave out, until the world dissolved into a shimmering haze, and she collapsed at the foot of the Crimson Bluffs, the very edge of the Stone Creek people's sacred lands. She knew the stories. No settler who crossed that line ever returned. But as her world faded to black, the last thing she saw was not the end she expected, but the beginning of an impossible story. A tall, imposing chief, his face a mask of stone, walking down from the bluffs to claim her from the dust. The land itself was an adversary. It stretched out before Amelia Vance, a canvas of cracked earth and sun-bleached grass, under a sky so vast and empty it threatened to swallow her whole. For 3 days, the only company she'd kept was the relentless drumbeat of her own heart and the phantom echo of her husband's voice. Sterling Thorne. The name was a brand on her soul. He wasn't a man who accepted defiance. He was a force of nature, much like the unforgiving territory she now traversed, a man who bent the world to his will and broke anything that would not bend. Her escape from the sprawling Thorne Ranch had been an act of pure distilled desperation. In the dead of night, she had slipped out with nothing but the clothes on her back, a half-empty canteen, and a heavy leather-bound ledger tucked deep within the folds of her dress, a secret she guarded more fiercely than her own life. It was her only leverage, her only shield against the long and violent reach of her husband. The ledger detailed Sterling's true business, a web of deceit, fraudulent land claims, and brutal intimidation that had built his empire on the ruins of other men's dreams. It was proof. It was her damnation, and her only possible salvation. Now that salvation felt impossibly distant. The water had run out at dawn. Her tongue was a dry, swollen thing in her mouth, and each breath was a rasp of hot sand in her lungs. The elegant dress she had fled in was now a tattered ruin of sweat and grime, its fine fabric catching on sagebrush and thorns. Her boots, meant for gentle strolls in the manicured gardens of the ranch, were shredded her feet, a symphony of agony. Ahead, the landscape began to change. The flat, monotonous plains gave way to rising bluffs of deep red rock formations that looked like the bones of the earth itself, breaking through the skin. The Crimson Bluffs. She knew the name whispered with fear and superstition by the ranch hands and the folk in the town of Redemption. This was the border, the threshold. Beyond lay the territory of the Stone Creek people, a tribe that had fiercely resisted every treaty and every advance, maintaining their isolation through a reputation for unyielding hostility. Stories told of them being shadows' ghosts who guarded their ancestral lands with an almost supernatural vigilance. Sterling had often spoken of them with a particular venom, calling them savages who stood in the way of progress, his progress. A wave of dizziness washed over Amelia. Her vision swam the red bluffs, blurring into a crimson tide. She stumbled, catching herself on a gnarled skeletal shrub. Just a little further, a desperate voice in her mind pleaded. There might be water, shade. But she knew it was a lie. Crossing that line was a death sentence of a different kind. Yet what lay behind her was a certainty of suffering, a return to a gilded cage where the bars were Sterling's possessive hands, and the lock was his unshakable will. She pushed onward her steps, becoming a drunken shuffle. The sun beat down on her head, a physical hammer of heat. The silence of the plains was absolute, broken only by the whisper of the hot wind and the frantic, shallow gasps of her own breathing. She felt her strength leaving her not gradually, but as if a plug had been pulled, draining it all at once. Her legs buckled. The ground rushed up to meet her. The sharp mineral scent of the red dust filled her nostrils. Lying there with her cheek pressed against the warm earth, she saw the line. A subtle, almost invisible demarcation where the trampled grass of the plains met the untouched sacred ground of the bluffs. She had reached it. She had collapsed on the very threshold between two worlds. Through a hazy curtain of failing consciousness, she saw movement. A figure detached itself from the rocks above, not with the frantic energy of an animal, but with a slow, deliberate grace. The figure was tall, broad-shouldered, his silhouette stark against the blinding sky. He moved with a purpose that was both unnerving and mesmerizing. As he drew closer, details swam into focus: dark braided hair, a face carved from the same stoic stone as the bluffs around him, eyes that seemed to hold the ancient patience of the land itself. He wore buckskin leggings and a simple leather vest over a chest that was a testament to a life lived in harmony and conflict with this harsh world. He was the chief, Kale. Though she did not know his name, she knew what he was. He was the embodiment of all the fearsome tales, the savage guardian of this forbidden land. This was it then, the end. She had escaped Sterling only to fall into the hands of the people he despised most. She closed her eyes, a single hot tear tracing a path through the grime on her cheek. She waited for the final violent blow, but it didn't come. Instead, she felt a profound stillness settle around her. The air seemed to cool slightly, as if a shadow had fallen over her. She dared to open her eyes a sliver. The chief was standing over her, his expression unreadable. He wasn't looking at her with malice or savagery, but with a deep, unsettling intensity, a gaze that seemed to see past the torn dress and the desperate flight into the very core of her being. Then, with a movement that was surprisingly gentle, he knelt. He reached out, not with a weapon, but with his hands. One arm slid beneath her shoulders, the other under her knees. He lifted her as if she weighed nothing. The strength in his arms was immense, yet the contact was not brutal. It was firm, secure. As her head lolled back against his shoulder, her world finally gave way to the encroaching darkness. Her last conscious thought was a swirl of confusion. She had fallen at the feet of a king in his wild kingdom, and instead of striking her down, he had lifted her up and was carrying her into the heart of the very lands she had been taught to fear above all else. Amelia awoke to the scent of wood smoke and sage. The world came back to her, not in a rush, but in gentle lapping waves of awareness. First the scent, then the sensation of soft buffalo hide beneath her, a stark contrast to the hard, unforgiving earth she remembered. A cool, damp cloth rested on her forehead, chasing away the remnants of the fevered haze. She blinked her eyes, struggling to adjust to the dim amber light. She was inside a dwelling, circular and spacious. The walls were made of stretched hides, and the filtered sunlight gave the interior a warm, almost sacred glow. Intricate patterns were painted on the hide walls, symbols of bison eagles and winding rivers that seemed to writhe with a life of their own. A small, controlled fire pit glowed in the center of the lodge, its smoke rising lazily to escape through an opening in the conical roof. Panic, cold and sharp, tried to seize her. She sat up abruptly, a gasp escaping her lips. The movement sent a fresh wave of dizziness through her, and she swayed. "Be still," a voice commanded. It was a low, resonant voice, the same one that had anchored her to consciousness before she fell. She turned her head. The Chief Kyle sat on a rush mat a few feet away. He was not looking at her, but was tending to a small bowl, grinding herbs with a smooth stone pestle. His movements were methodical, economical, imbued with a quiet confidence that was both calming and intimidating. He wore no expression of threat, yet his very presence filled the lodge a silent testament to his authority. Where am I?" Amelia whispered, her voice a dry rasp. He looked up then, and his dark eyes met hers. They were not the cold, flat eyes of a killer from the stories, but deep and intelligent, carrying a weight of history and sorrow she could not begin to comprehend. "You are in the heart of the Stone Creek lands," he said simply, his English precise, with only a slight musical cadence that marked it as a learned tongue. "You collapsed at our border. You would have been dust by morning." He rose and came to her side, holding out a wooden cup. "Drink." She hesitated, her mind screaming with the warnings she had heard her entire life. Savages, kidnappers. But the thirst was a raging inferno in her throat, overriding her fear. She took the cup with a trembling hand. The water was cool and clean, tasting faintly of minerals and earth. It was the most wonderful thing she had ever tasted. She drank it all greedily. As she lowered the cup, she became acutely aware of her state. Someone had cleaned the dirt and blood from her face and hands. Her ruined boots had been removed, and her blistered feet had been treated with a soothing, fragrant salve. Her dress was still torn and filthy, a jarring emblem of the world she had fled, but tucked inside, she could feel the hard, rectangular shape of the ledger. A wave of relief, so powerful it almost made her weep, washed over her. It was still there. Her weapon was safe. "Why?" she asked, her voice a little stronger now. "Why did you help me?" Kyle did not answer immediately. He took the cup from her and returned to his spot by the fire. "My people do not leave a dying woman to the vultures, even one with your skin," he said, his gaze fixed on the flames. "Life is a gift from the Great Spirit. It is not for us to waste it." The lodge flap was pushed aside, and another man entered. He was younger than Kyle, his features sharper, his eyes burning with a fierce, unconcealed hostility. He stopped short upon seeing Amelia awake, and his lips curled into a sneer. "The white woman wakes," he said in his own tongue, his voice laced with contempt. He then switched to heavily accented English, his words clearly for her benefit. "Our chief plays nursemaid to a trespasser. Does she have a name, or do we just call her Burden?" Kyle's gaze shifted to the newcomer, and the temperature in the lodge seemed to drop. "Her name is not your concern, Torin," Kyle said, his voice quiet but edged with steel. "Your concern should be the watchtowers. I saw fresh tracks near the northern ridge, riderless horse shod, heading east. Amelia's blood ran cold. Sterling's men. They were searching." Torin scoffed, gesturing dismissively at Amelia. "Perhaps it belongs to her friends. You bring a wolf into our camp, Kale, and are surprised when the pack follows. She's a bad omen. The elders are whispering. They say you forget the lessons our fathers learned in blood. They say you see the ghost of your wife in this stranger's face." The moment the words left Torin's mouth, the air crackled with tension. Kyle rose to his feet in a single fluid motion. He was taller than Torin, and his quiet stillness was suddenly replaced by a palpable aura of restrained power that made the younger man take an involuntary step back. "Do not speak her name," Kyle said, his voice dropping to a near whisper, yet carrying more menace than any shout. "You dishonor her memory, and you question my leadership in the same breath. Be careful, Torin." Torin held Kyle's gaze for a tense moment, his jaw tight with resentment, before he gave a curt, angry nod and stormed out of the lodge. The silence he left behind was heavy. Kyle stood for a long moment, his back to Amelia, his shoulders rigid. The mention of his wife had clearly struck a deep, unhealed wound. Amelia felt a strange, unexpected pang of empathy. She knew about loss. She knew about wounds that never healed. He finally turned back, the storm in his eyes, banked but not extinguished. "You bring trouble with you," he stated, not as an accusation, but as a simple fact. "Who are you running from?" Amelia swallowed her fear of Sterling, warring with her fear of this man and his people. Trust was a currency she no longer possessed. Every kindness she had ever known had come with a price, usually paid in pain. But looking at Cale, at the profound sadness that now clouded his features, she felt a flicker of something else. He wasn't her jailer. He was her protector, whether by choice or by a code she didn't understand. "My husband," she finally admitted, the words tasting like poison. "His name is Sterling Thorne." She saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. The name Thorne was known even here in this isolated sanctuary. It was a name synonymous with greed, with land, stolen with fences that cut across ancient bison trails. It was the name of the white man's insatiable hunger. Cale's expression hardened, but the hostility was not directed at her. It was for the man she had named. Thorne. He repeated the name, a curse on his tongue. He is a man who builds his house on the graves of others. His fences are like snakes, strangling the life from the land. He looked at her again, his gaze piercing. And he is not a man who lets go of what he believes is his. "No," Amelia whispered, clutching the hidden ledger through the fabric of her dress. "He is not." Kyle nodded slowly, a grim understanding dawning on his face. He now understood that the woman he had carried from the dust was not merely a lost settler. She was a fugitive from the very embodiment of the threat his people had fought for generations. He had not just brought a woman into his camp. He had brought in the fuse to a powder keg, and the man holding the match was riding hard in their direction. The fragile sanctuary he had offered her was about to become a battleground. The Thorne Ranch was not a home. It was a fortress. It sat in the center of a vast, conquered territory, its main house, a 2-story monument to Sterling Thorne's ambition, built from timber hauled over 100 miles, and stone quarried from the hills he now owned. From the veranda, Sterling could survey thousands of acres of his land, dotted with thousands of his cattle, all of it, a testament to his indomitable will. And from that veranda, he now watched as 2 of his best trackers, Finn and Roscoe, rode in their shoulders, slumped in failure. Sterling Thorne was a man carved from granite and greed. His face was weathered not by the honest son of a working man, but by the constant scowl of a man perpetually dissatisfied with his own dominion. His eyes, a pale, cold blue, missed nothing. He held a glass of whiskey in one hand, the amber liquid catching the morning light. He didn't move as the riders dismounted and approached the steps, hats in hand. "Well," Sterling's voice was low, deceptively calm, like the air before a thunderstorm. Finn, the older of the 2, cleared his throat. "We lost her, Mr. Thorne. The trail went cold right at the edge of the Crimson Bluffs. It's Stone Creek land, sir. We couldn't follow." The silence that followed was heavy and suffocating. Sterling took a slow sip of his whiskey, his eyes fixed on the distant red haze of the bluffs. He had forbidden anyone, Amelia included, from ever going near that territory. It was the one piece of this country he didn't yet control, a festering insult to his authority. "Couldn't," Sterling repeated softly. "Or wouldn't." Sir Roscoe stammered, a younger man, unnerved by his employer's unnatural calm. "You know the stories. It ain't safe, and besides, there was no sign she crossed. The trail just vanished. It's like the ground swallowed her up. Sterling turned his pale eyes on them, and the calm evaporated, replaced by a flash of cold fire. The ground does not swallow people, Roscoe. She is out there. My wife. My property. And something else of mine is missing. He set the glass down with a sharp click. My private ledger. Finn and Roscoe exchanged a nervous glance. They knew of the ledger. They knew it held the real secrets of the Thorn Empire, the kind of secrets that could bring marshals and judges sniffing around, the kind of secrets that could undo everything. She's a fool, Sterling mused, his voice turning inward. A beautiful, foolish little bird who thinks she can fly from her cage. She doesn't realize the whole world is my cage. He turned back to his men. Saddle fresh horses. Take 5 more men. You will ride to the town of Redemption. You will find Sheriff Brody. Tell him my wife has been taken, abducted by the savages from the bluffs. Finn's eyes widened. But sir, we don't know that. There was no sign. I did not ask for your opinion. Finn. Sterling's voice cracked like a whip. I gave you an order. You will tell Sheriff Brody precisely what I said. A kidnapping. A vulnerable white woman taken by hostiles. He will understand the implications. He owes me. They all do. Sterling's plan was taking shape in his mind, cold and precise. He didn't care if Amelia had gone there willingly or had been dragged. The narrative was what mattered. A hysterical runaway wife was a private matter, a scandal. But a white woman abducted by the Stone Creek people. That was a threat to every settler in the territory. That was an excuse for action. That was a reason to bring down the full righteous fury of the law, or what passed for it, in this part of the world, upon the one piece of land he could not yet tame. An hour later, Sterling rode into the dusty one-street town of Redemption. It was a town that owed its existence to him. He owned the saloon, the general store, the livery. He held the mortgages on half the homes. When he rode down the street, men tipped their hats and averted their eyes. He was their king, and this was his shabby provincial court. He found Sheriff Brody in his office, a small, stuffy room that smelled of stale coffee and desperation. Brody was a man well past his prime, with a paunch straining the buttons of his vest and a face permanently flushed with cheap whiskey. His badge was a tarnished prop, a symbol of authority he wielded only at Sterling's discretion. Thorn. Brody said, not bothering to get up. What trouble brings you to my humble abode? My wife is gone, Brody. Sterling said, cutting straight to the point. Taken, dragged off by Kyle's heathens. Brody finally sat up, his lazy demeanor evaporating. Taken, are you sure, Amelia? Her horse was found wandering miles from the ranch. Her trail leads directly to the Crimson Bluffs. My men wouldn't cross. They fear the ghost stories. Sterling leaned forward, his hands flat on Brody's desk, his presence crowding the small room. But you and I, we don't believe in ghosts, do we, Sheriff? We believe in opportunities. Brody licked his lips, his mind working slowly. A posse, it's dangerous territory, Thorn. Kyle doesn't welcome visitors. I don't want a posse of drunken farmers, Sterling sneered. I want something more official. There's a cavalry outpost at Fort Laramie, less than 2 days' ride from here. A federal matter. An American citizen, a woman abducted from her home by hostile natives. That's a story a captain would listen to. A story that demands a response. A response with rifles and blue uniforms. The sheriff's eyes widened as he grasped the full terrifying scope of Sterling's plan. This wasn't about getting his wife back. This was about starting a war. This was an excuse to break the Stone Creek people, to sweep them aside and claim their resource-rich land, the land Thorn had coveted for years. Sterling, that's "That's inciting the army," Brodie whispered, horrified. "Men will die. Their women, their children." Sterling smiled, a chilling, humourless expression. "Progress has a price, Brodie. You've always understood that. It's why your pockets are a little heavier than they ought to be on a sheriff's salary." He straightened up, his shadow falling across the sheriff. "You will send a telegram to Fort Laramie. You will report the kidnapping. You will request federal assistance to retrieve a citizen in mortal danger. You will do this because your comfortable life depends on it." Sheriff Brodie stared at the man before him, a man who would burn the world to reclaim a book and a wife, though it was hard to tell which he valued more. He saw the cold, unblinking certainty in Sterling's eyes, and knew he had no choice. He was a fly caught in a spider's web, and the spider was now demanding he help spin it wider. I'll send the wire," Brodie mumbled, his gaze falling to the floor. "I knew I could count on you," Sterling said smoothly. He turned and walked out of the office, leaving the sheriff to stew in the stench of his own corruption. Outside, Sterling mounted his horse and looked once more towards the distant blood-red bluffs. Amelia thought she was the hunted. She had no idea that she was merely the bait. The real prey was the land, the people, the very spirit of that unconquered place. And the hunter was a patient man, a man who knew how to use the weapons of his world, fear lies and the righteous indignation of a government that saw a people's home as nothing more than an obstacle on a map. The hunt had begun. The days that followed settled into a strange rhythm for Amelia. The initial terror subsided, replaced by a cautious, watchful state of existence. Kyle had given her his lodge, moving his own sleeping furs to a smaller communal structure. It was a gesture of respect and protection that left her both grateful and deeply unsettled. She was a guest, but also a prisoner of circumstance. Her world shrunk to the confines of this village, nestled in a hidden valley behind the bluffs. The Stone Creek people were nothing like the monstrous caricatures from Sterling's tirades. They were a proud, resilient community. She watched the women treat hides with a practiced skill, their laughter and chatter a constant musical backdrop to the day. She saw children playing games with stones and sticks, their joyous shouts echoing off the canyon walls. She saw the men, strong and stoic, returning from hunts with deer slung over their horses, providing for their families with a quiet dignity. It was a world of order, of purpose, of connection to the earth that was as foreign to her as another planet. They regarded her with a mixture of curiosity and deep suspicion. She was an outsider, a symbol of the world that had brought them nothing but pain and broken promises. Children would sometimes stop and stare, their dark eyes wide, before being shooed away by their mothers. The warriors, especially, Torin and his followers, would watch her with open hostility, their glares a constant reminder that her presence here was a tolerated anomaly, not a welcome one. Yet there were small kindnesses. An old woman named Lyda, whose face was a beautiful map of wrinkles, and whose eyes held a knowing wisdom, began to visit her. Lyda spoke no English, but she would bring Amelia bowls of savory stew and strips of dried jerky. She showed her through gesture and patient example how to mend her tattered dress with a bone needle and sinew thread. In these silent interactions, Amelia felt a flicker of human connection that she hadn't realized she was starving for. Her most complex interactions were with Kyle. He was a leader, burdened by the weight of his people's survival. She would see him in council with the elders, his face grave, as they discussed the shod horse tracks and other signs of encroachment. He was patient, thoughtful, and carried an authority that needed no bluster. One evening he came to the lodge as she was finishing a small meal Lyda had brought her. He sat by the fire, the flickering light playing across the strong lines of his face, deepening the shadows of sorrow in his eyes. "You are stronger," he observed. "The desert has not claimed you." "Thanks to you," Amelia said softly. "I would be dead if not for you and your people. Lyda has taken a liking to you." He noted a faint, almost imperceptible smile touching his lips. "She has not done that since. For a long time. She says you have a survivor's spirit trapped in a songbird's body." Amelia looked down at her hands, the needlework clumsy but functional. "I'm not a survivor. I'm a runner." "Sometimes they are the same thing," Kyle replied. He grew silent, his gaze lost in the dancing flames. The mood shifted, becoming more somber, more personal. "Torin was right," he said, suddenly his voice low. "When I saw you lying in the dust, you reminded me of her. Of my wife, Ayita." Amelia held her breath, knowing she was on sacred ground. "She was not from our tribe." He continued, his voice thick with memory. "She was from the river people downstream. Our union was meant to strengthen the bonds between us. She had a spirit like a wildfire. She saw beauty in everything, even in a world that was growing darker. She taught me the first words of your language. She believed that understanding was a stronger weapon than hatred." He paused, the pain of the memory, a raw physical presence in the lodge. 3 winters ago, a sickness came. The white man's sickness. It swept through the village like a ghost, stealing breath and life. It took many. It took her. He looked at Amelia, his eyes filled with an ocean of loss. "I was chief. I was supposed to protect my people. I could not even protect my own wife. I learned then that some enemies cannot be fought with arrows or knives." Amelia felt her own heart ache in response. She understood his grief, his sense of failure. It resonated with her own. "I'm so sorry," she whispered. "So when I saw you," he went on, "fleeing from a world that promised you everything and gave you a cage, I saw her spirit, her defiance. To leave you there would have felt like leaving her to die all over again." A silence fell between them, but it was no longer a silence of suspicion. It was one of shared grief, of a connection forged in the crucible of loss. In that moment, Amelia knew she had to trust him. Her secret was too heavy to carry alone, and the threat it represented was a threat to his people now, too. "It's not just my husband I'm running from," she said, her voice barely a whisper. She reached into her dress and pulled out the leather-bound ledger. She held it out to him. "It's this." Kyle took the book, his brow furrowed in confusion. He opened it. He couldn't read the words, but he understood the columns of numbers, the maps of creeks and valleys. His creeks, his valleys, with names and lines scrawled over them. "My husband is a thief," Amelia explained, her voice gaining strength as she gave voice to her rebellion. "This book is his record. It's proof that he has been filing false claims, stealing land not just from the government, but from other settlers. He's been diverting water from rivers that your people depend on. The names in this book, they are men he has ruined or worse. He calls it progress. It's a testament to his greed. It's the reason he will never ever stop hunting me. This book can destroy him." Kyle looked from the ledger to her face, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. He finally saw the full picture. He saw her courage, the sheer, desperate bravery it took to steal the heart of her enemy's power. She was not just a victim. She was a warrior in her own right, fighting with a weapon he had never conceived of. "This is a dangerous thing," he said, his voice grave as he handed it back to her. "A white man's weapon. It's the only one I have, she replied, securing it back in its hiding place. Then we must be careful how you use it, he said. He now saw that protecting her was no longer just a matter of principle or a balm for an old wound. Her fight was now his fight. The ledger in her possession was not just about stolen acres and broken men in the white world. The lines on those maps, the diverted rivers, were a direct assault on the lifeblood of the Stone Creek people. Sterling Thorne had been waging a silent war against them for years. Amelia had just delivered the enemy's battle plans directly into his hands. The whispers on the wind were no longer just rumors of searching riders. They were the harbingers of a storm that was about to break over them all. The sense of fragile peace in the valley shattered 3 days later. A young scout, barely a man, rode into the village at a gallop, his horse lathered, and his eyes wide with alarm. He slid from his mount before it had even stopped running, straight to Cale, who was overseeing the repair of a corral. "They are coming," the scout gasped, pointing back towards the bluffs. "Not just Thorne's men. Men in blue coats. They carry rifles that shine in the sun, 12 of them. They move slowly, but they move with purpose." The word spread through the village like a prairie fire. Soldiers. The word itself was a curse, a name for a long and bloody history of broken treaties and violence. Panic began to bubble beneath the surface of the community's stoic calm. Mothers pulled their children close. The warriors began to gather their hands, instinctively going to the knives at their belts and the bows slung over their shoulders. Kyle's face became a mask of cold fury. Thorne had not just sent his hired thugs. He had summoned the United States cavalry. The lie was now clear. He had painted Amelia's flight as an abduction, transforming a domestic dispute into an act of war. It was a masterful evil stroke. Torin confronted Cale in the center of the village, his voice ringing with accusation for all to hear. "I warned you, Cale. I told you this woman was a plague. You brought this serpent into our home, and now its poison will kill us all." He gestured around at the fearful faces, his words stoking their anxiety. "Look at them. Are their lives worth the price of your foolish honor? The soldiers are not here for a debate. They are here for her, and they will burn this village to the ground to get her. They are here because of Thorne's lies, not because of her." Kyle retorted, his voice a low growl, but Torin was not to be silenced. "What is the difference?" he spat. "Give them the woman, let Thorne have his property back. We will tell them she wandered here, and we cared for her. It is our only chance to avoid bloodshed. We cannot fight them." A murmur of agreement went through some of the assembled warriors. The fear was real. They had heard the stories from other tribes, stories of massacres of women and children, cut down of entire peoples, wiped from the earth. Torin's words, born of anger, were also born of a desperate, pragmatic fear for their survival. "No," Kyle said, his voice ringing with an authority that cut through the rising panic. "We will not hand over a guest who sought sanctuary. To do so would be to surrender our spirit, our very soul. We would become cowards, bartering a life for a promise of peace from men who have never honored their promises." He turned to face his people, his gaze sweeping over them. "We have never bowed to Thorne. We will not start today. To hand her over is to tell him he has won, that he is our master. I will not live as a slave on my own land." Then he looked directly at Amelia, who had emerged from the lodge, her face pale with dread. She had heard everything. The soldiers were here because of her. These people were on the brink of war because of her. The weight of it was crushing. "But the choice will not be mine alone." Kyle continued, his eyes locked on hers. He was speaking to his people, but also to her. It is her life, and it is her weapon they truly fear. He strode towards Amelia, stopping before her. The entire village watched, silent and waiting. "Thorn has brought the serpent to our door," he said to her, his voice low enough for only her to hear amidst the tense silence. "He thinks he has us coiled and ready to strike. But you hold a different kind of venom. The truth." He gestured to where she kept the ledger hidden. "This changes things, but using it will require you to face him. Here, on our terms." Amelia's heart hammered against her ribs. She could run. She could try to slip away into the hills, try to draw the soldiers after her. But she knew that was a fantasy. They would hunt her down, and they would still see this village as complicit. Or she could surrender herself. Go back to Sterling. The thought was so vile it made her physically ill. It would mean a life of torment worse than death, and the ledger, her only justice, would be lost forever. Thorn would win, utterly and completely. And then there was the third option, the one Cale was offering her, not to run, not to surrender, but to stand, to fight, not with a bow or a rifle, but with the truth, to uncoil the serpent of Thorn's lies and let it strike back at its master. It was the most terrifying choice of all. It would mean confronting the man who haunted her nightmares, but not as a victim, as an adversary. She looked at Cale at the unwavering belief in his eyes. He was willing to risk everything for a principle, for a single desperate woman he barely knew. She looked at Lyda, who was watching her with an expression of profound sadness, but also encouragement. She saw the fear in the faces of the villagers, and she knew she was the cause of it. She could not let them pay the price for her freedom without a fight. Her resolve hardened. The fear did not vanish, but it was joined by something else, a cold, sharp anger. She had been running for so long. Now it was time to stop. "I will not be the reason your people die," she said to Kyle, her voice clear and steady, ringing out in the silence. She then turned, facing Torin and the others. "But I will not be his victim any longer. If there is to be a confrontation, I will be at the center of it. I will face him." A murmur went through the crowd. Torin looked at her, his expression a mixture of shock and grudging respect. This was not the meek, terrified creature he had imagined. Kyle gave a single sharp nod. The decision was made. The serpent's coil was tightening, but now they knew where they would strike. He turned to his warriors. "We will not meet them on the plains. We will not hide in the hills. We will meet them at the threshold, at the foot of the crimson bluffs where this began. We will let them come to us, and we will let them hear the truth before the first arrow flies." The time for whispers was over. The storm had arrived. The air at the foot of the crimson bluffs was thick with a tension that was almost a physical force. The sun beat down on the two groups poised on the edge of a cataclysm. On one side stood a dozen blue-coated cavalrymen, their carbines held at the ready. They were led by a young, stern-faced captain named Lawrence, a man who believed in orders and the clear-cut morality of his uniform. Beside him, mounted on a fine black stallion, was Sterling Thorn, his face a mask of righteous concern, his cold eyes gleaming with triumph. Behind them, Sheriff Brody and a few of Thorn's men looked on a nervous gallery to a drama they had helped create. On the other side, just within the shadow of the great red rocks, stood Cale and 20 of his best warriors. They were not arranged in a battle line, but stood with a quiet, powerful stillness. They held bows and lances, but their greatest weapon was their presence, their unshakable connection to the land beneath their feet. They were not invaders. They were defenders of their home. Between these two forces in the no-man's land of sun-baked dust stood Amelia. She had walked out to meet them alone, a decision that had sent a ripple of shock through both sides. She was no longer the bedraggled fugitive who had collapsed on this very spot. Lyda had given her a simple, unadorned buckskin dress. Her hair was clean and braided. She stood tall, her fear a cold knot in her stomach, but her resolve a fire in her veins. Kyle had given her one instruction: speak your truth. It is stronger than their bullets. Amelia. Sterling called out, his voice dripping with false relief. My dear, thank God you are safe, Captain. You see, they have her. We must get her back. Captain Lawrence raised a hand, silencing him. He was a professional soldier, not a vigilante. He addressed Cale directly. I am Captain Lawrence of the United States Army. This man, Mr. Thorne, claims you have abducted his wife. Release her to us now, and we can resolve this without bloodshed. Before Cale could answer, Amelia's voice, clear and strong, cut through the air. I was not abducted, Captain. Every eye turned to her. Sterling's face tightened, the mask of concern slipping to reveal the raw fury beneath. This man is my husband, Amelia continued, pointing a trembling but steady finger at Sterling. And I ran from him. I ran because he is a monster, a tyrant who ruled my life with fear and his fists. A murmur went through the soldiers. Captain Lawrence's brow furrowed. This was not the simple scenario he had been presented with. Ma'am, these are serious allegations. They are the truth, Amelia insisted, and they are not the only truths I have to tell. He has lied to you, Captain. He hasn't brought you here to save me. He has brought you here to be his personal army, to help him destroy these people, and steal this land just as he has stolen from so many others. She's hysterical, Sterling shouted, spurring his horse forward a few steps. The savages have filled her head with lies. She doesn't know what she's saying. I know exactly what I'm saying, Sterling, Amelia said, her voice dropping, taking on a cold, hard edge he had never heard from her before. And then she played her final card. And I have proof. From a leather pouch at her waist, she produced the ledger. She held it aloft, the sun glinting off the worn leather cover. Do you recognize this, Sterling, your little book of secrets? Sterling's face went white. He stared at the ledger as if it were a venomous snake. All the color drained from his face, replaced by a ghastly pallor of pure, unadulterated panic. He had miscalculated. He had assumed the book was a bargaining chip she would try to use in secret to buy her passage away from him. He never dreamed she would be so bold, so insane, as to reveal it in front of the United States Army. Captain Lawrence, Amelia said, her voice ringing with newfound authority as she turned to the soldier. This book contains proof of Mr. Thorne's crimes. It details years of fraudulent land claims filed with the very government you serve. It lists the names of men he has extorted and the water rights he has illegally seized. The very water that these people and every other settler in this valley depend on to live. He isn't just a brute who beats his wife. He is a criminal who has built an empire on lies and theft. She took a breath and made her devil's bargain. I will give this ledger to you, Captain. You can take it back to Fort Laramie. Let your superiors investigate. All I ask is that you listen to my testimony, and that you and your men leave this place in peace. Your fight is not with the Stone Creek people. It is with him. Captain Lawrence was stunned into silence. He looked from Amelia's fierce, determined face to Sterling's crumbling composure, then to the stoic, unmoving line of warriors behind her. He was a man of the law, a man of order. He had come here to rescue a kidnapped woman, but he was now standing in the middle of something far more complex and sordid. He was an officer, but he was not a fool. He could recognize the stench of corruption when he smelled it. Lies, all of it, Sterling roared, his control finally snapping. He drew a pistol from his coat, his eyes wild with desperation. "She's a lying." He never finished the sentence. An arrow, a black streak of motion faster than the eye could follow, flew from the line of warriors. It didn't strike Sterling. It struck the pistol in his hand, shattering the wooden grip and sending the gun flying into the dust. It was a shot of impossible skill, a message of deadly precision. Sterling cried out, clutching his stinging, bleeding hand. The arrow had been loosed by Cale. It was a declaration the violence would end here. Captain Lawrence made his decision. "Mr. Thorne," he said, his voice like ice, "you are under my protection now. You will come with us back to the fort to answer these allegations." He turned to his sergeant. "Sergeant, disarm Mr. Thorne's men, and put him under guard. Sheriff," he added, his eyes narrowing at the sweating, terrified lawman, "I think you and I will be having a long conversation as well." The soldiers moved to obey their expressions, a mixture of confusion and relief. The standoff was over. The violence had been averted, not by a hail of bullets, but by a woman's courage and a book of numbers. Sterling Thorne, his empire collapsing around him, stared at Amelia with eyes full of pure hatred. He had been outmaneuvered, defeated, not by a rival rancher, not by the government, but by the quiet, timid woman he had thought he owned, and by the savage chief he had so profoundly underestimated. As the soldiers led him away, a broken and defeated man, he was no longer the hunter. He was the captured. In the aftermath, a strange, quiet peace settled over the valley. The departure of the cavalry with a humiliated Sterling Thorne in tow felt like the passing of a great storm. The sky seemed clearer, the air easier to breathe. The people of the Stone Creek tribe who had stood on the precipice of annihilation returned to their homes with a newfound respect for their chief's wisdom and a bewildered admiration for the white woman who had stood with them. Amelia remained in the village for another week, a guest of honor, now not a refugee. The suspicion in people's eyes was replaced with gratitude. Torrin, in a rare display of humility, approached her and gave a stiff, formal nod. "You have the heart of a warrior," he said in his rough English, the highest compliment he could bestow. Lyda simply embraced her, a silent gesture that spoke volumes. But Amelia knew she could not stay. This was not her world. She was a ghost from another place, a reminder of a threat that, while vanquished in the form of Sterling Thorne, still existed beyond the bluffs. Her victory had been won, but the war between their two worlds was far from over. To remain would be to invite more trouble, to be a constant living complication in Kyle's life, and a symbol of the world his people sought to keep at bay. On her final evening, she stood with Kyle on a high ridge overlooking the valley as the sun set, painting the sky in fiery strokes of orange and purple. For a long while they said nothing, simply sharing the profound silence of the vast, wild land. Captain Lawrence sent a rider. Kyle said finally, his voice a low rumble. He said the ledger was all the proof they needed. Thorne's empire is being dismantled by the government he cheated. The other ranchers he bullied are speaking out. He will not trouble anyone again. And the land? Amelia asked, her voice soft. The old treaties are being examined. For now there is peace. You have bought my people time, Amelia Vance, a debt that can never be repaid. Amelia shook her head. It is I who am in your debt. You saved my life. You showed me that strength is not about cruelty or power, but about this. She gestured to the peaceful valley, to the rising smoke from the cook fires, to the deep, abiding stillness of the earth. You gave me back my own heart. He turned to face her, his dark eyes searching hers. In the fading light she saw not just a chief, but a man who had lost so much, yet who had opened his heart to a stranger, risking everything in the process. An unspoken understanding passed between them, a recognition of a bond that transcended their different worlds, a connection that was as real and as beautiful as the sunset before them. But like the sunset, it was fleeting. It could not last. "Where will you go?" he asked. "West," she said, a sad smile touching her lips. "To California, perhaps. A place where the name Thorn means nothing. A place where Amelia Vance can be born again." The next morning, Kyle provided her with a strong, gentle mare supplies for her journey and a map he had drawn on a piece of hide marking safe passages and sources of water. The entire village came to see her off. Lyda pressed a small carved bird into her hand for good luck. As she mounted the horse, Kyle stood before her. He reached out and gently touched her cheek, a gesture of profound tenderness and farewell. "Go in peace, Amelia," he said. "May the Great Spirit guide your path and grant you the freedom you have earned. And may it watch over you and your people, Kyle," she whispered, her throat tight with emotion. She turned the horse and rode away, not looking back, for she knew if she did, she might never leave. She rode towards the setting sun, a lone figure heading for a new life, forever changed by the people she had found in the heart of the wild. Kyle watched until she was a tiny speck on the horizon, a part of him riding with her. He had saved her, but she, in turn, had saved him. She had reminded him that compassion was not a weakness, and that even in an age of darkness and despair, a single act of courage could change the world. He turned back to his village, to his people, his heart heavy with her absence, but light with the peace she had helped him secure. He owed her a debt, one that would be paid, not in coin or goods, but in memory, a story to be told by the fireside for generations to come. A story of the sky, the dust, and the woman who had fallen from one world only to find her strength in another. A story is more than just words. It's a journey into another time, a window into the human heart. The tale of Amelia Vance and Chief Kale is a testament to the fact that even in the harshest of landscapes, courage can bloom, and that the deepest divides can be bridged by understanding and a shared sense of justice. It's a story of two worlds colliding not in a storm of hatred, but in a quiet moment of grace that would forever alter the destiny of a people and the future of a woman who refused to be broken. Theirs was a victory not of weapons, but of will, a testament to the enduring power of truth in a world built on lies. If this story of courage, sacrifice, and the unlikely bonds forged in the unforgiving West moved you, please help us share more tales like it. Hit that like button, share this video with someone who appreciates a powerful story, and be sure to subscribe to our channel for more journeys back in time. Your support allows us to keep these histories, these powerful human dramas alive. Thank you for listening.